beginning by 2001, around January 2001, when Bill Clinton left the White House actually in disgrace, he needed something else to do. It was tough to raise money for yet another library in a place like Little Rock. That's not a sexy cause.
Yeah.
So he got involved. He got involved with various, frankly, crooks. One of them was a gentleman called Rajat Gupta, who then was the managing partner of a gigantic consulting firm called McKinsey. And Rajat was in trouble himself. Later, he went to prison for insider trading. The two of them began, there was an earthquake in India, and everybody around the world were very generous when we see floods and earthquakes and tsunamis. Rajat and Bill got together and created an illegal charity called the American Indian Foundation. And that, in one set of disclosures, they claim that they raised $1 billion
A
for
bit of
earthquake.
wow.
But in their official books, they claim that they raised less than $100,000. And that is the essence of charity fraud. If you have a loosely controlled thing that's going after sexy causes like fighting earthquake relief or AIDS or Haiti, um, billions of dollars will come your way. If you've got famous people around the charity, Bill Clinton and Elton John and Princess Diana, you name it, somebody like that will attract literally billions of dollars via the internet, via wires and other ways. And if you can convince other government leaders like your Taoiseach,
Taoiseach, yeah, very good. Well done, Charles.
Bertie Ahern, uh, in 2003 was seduced into supporting this Clinton Foundation effort to fight HIV and AIDS. That was a completely illegal, unauthorized effort. No one has ever been able successfully to track down the amount of money that actually went to maybe towards that cause. In Ireland, I've been able to get through your government. There's a Freedom of Information, the equivalent of a U.S. Freedom of Information Act request was made, and there's extensive emails and records that I got during 2003, back and forth between members of your government, um, arranging for the Irish people to give over 100 million euros to the Clinton Foundation to fight HIV/AIDS in Africa. Now, there are several problems with this. The agreements that were struck between the Clinton Foundation and your government are completely illegal.
Wow.
There was no such authorization in the United States for this activity. It was not a valid activity. It was a massive amount of money relative to what the Clintons were supposed to be doing. It was therefore, on the face of it, illegal under U.S. law. If it's illegal under U.S. law, I doubt it's legal under Irish law. Nonetheless, your people sent over $100 million, in theory, to fight HIV/AIDS in places like, I think it was Mozambique and Lesotho and one other country. I forget if it was Tanzania or not, or Rwanda. But beginning in 2003 or 2004, your government, under the direction of a gentleman Connor Linehan, through Irish Aid, and there's all sorts of information available on this, did indeed send that money towards these projects, which in theory were directed by an illegally organized charity, led by Bill Clinton and led by our magaziner. And there's never been a proper accounting of that money. Now, the money is one thing, but what Jerry will attest, what got my blood boiling on this is that the money was supposed to be used to purchase medicine to give to people who suffer from HIV and AIDS in Africa. And unfortunately, in Africa, even now, the rates of infection of HIV and AIDS are very, very high, and the medical treatment used to be very, very expensive. So the theory was that Bill Clinton and our magaziner would bring down the price of this medicine, and it would be used to help these desperately poor people in Africa. There are major league problems with this whole analysis, as often happens, anything having to do with Ira Magaziner and Bill Clinton. The first problem with it is in Ireland, and I looked at these statistics, in Ireland, you have a very high number of doctors per 100,000 people in your country. You have a very high number of hospital beds. You've got your country is basically fully electrified. You therefore can maintain medicines easily. People are more concentrated in cities, far more concentrated in cities than they are in Africa. In Africa, they're in Haiti and places like that. There are nations that have 2 doctors for every 100,000 persons. There are nations that only a third of the country is in these big cities that have no electricity in the rural areas. There's no way to get to these AIDS sufferers who are scattered all over the place. And it's not about simply giving them pills, even if they're properly constructed pills. When you people who have HIV and AIDS in these poor countries often have other diseases associated with, bad water, no electricity, and this and that. So you can't just simply send a stream of pills out into the hinterland using volunteers and think that you're fighting HIV/AIDS. That's if the medicine actually isn't adulterated. Now, there's a diabolical company called Ranbaxy, and it's a very dangerous thing to these medicines. Just as I was talking a little bit about these medicines, these HIV/AIDS medicines are very dangerous medicines. If you give HIV/AIDS medicine to somebody who does not have HIV, you're killing them. If you give them medicine that isn't properly, checked to make sure that, between flying it all or sending it by boat from India all the way down to Mozambique or Lesotho, that it's not stored properly, it's on the boat or in the plane, and then when it gets into the country at the port and then into the rural area, that medicine can degrade. And you give that medicine, the kind of medicine that the Clintons claim they were using for kids with AIDS or for people who can't, it's called second line medicine, that it's where the first line medicines don't work. You give that stuff and it's not right, if something's off with the medicine, you are actually killing people. I mean, and the deaths that people suffer from this are not, their skin falls off their body. It's horrifying ways to die. And, this kind of stuff cannot be administered by volunteers, by people, with 13 Blackberries flying around the world, jumping to this meeting and that meeting the way Ira Magaziner likes to do. You got to have people on the ground in these countries that don't have the hospital systems, that don't have the doctors and nurses, that don't have the way to get to the patients. The medicine cost of treating HIV and AIDS is less than a fifth in developed worlds of the additional costs. The care, the treatment, the doctor's attention, the buildings, and all that kind of stuff. If you don't have any of that on the ground, you don't have roads. You don't have safe roads. You're kidding yourself putting that amount of money in these corrupt places at a time when, in addition to whatever Irish money was going to Mozambique, George W. Bush, and I have my issues with him, even though I'm distantly related to him, George W. Bush signed up to put $15 billion worth of U.S. money starting in 2003 into countries like Mozambique around the world to fight HIV and AIDS. 15 billion. Why would Ireland need to send another 150 whatever into these places? And how do they make sure between the U.S. and other efforts and Irish efforts that we weren't double counting? That we weren't sending, the corrupt people in rural parts of Mozambique weren't, taking the same droopy-eyed child and putting that person out in front of the audience and saying, yeah, please give us this money, Ireland. You get the money, take the same child, show that to the Americans. I mean, it's the potential for fraud here and abuse is so gigantic. And then you get to the question of the drugs themselves.
Now, as we get into the defective drugs that were produced out of India, this company Ranbaxy, why don't you explain who Ira Magaziner is and what kind of a role he played on the Clinton Health AIDS Initiative?
All right, so Ira Magaziner is a fellow who met Bill Clinton. He was a year behind him when Ira was a Rhodes Scholar, who also strangely did not fill out his 2-year term as a Rhodes Scholar in Oxford. But the two of them met there. They stayed friendly. Ira became a strategic consultant. Ira did very well for himself. He's quite very proficient with technology. And Ira was among the people who takes credit for crafting Ireland's forward-looking game plan of attracting the pharmaceutical industry, attracting knowledge-based industries into Ireland, which is a campaign that began, I think, in the 70s and 80s and really took off in the 90s and the early 2000s. Ira really can rightly take credit for that. But the problem with Ira Magaziner is he is sloppy as hell. You can see this in the public filings. His name is all over fraudulent declarations made in the United States of America and around the world. His signature is on these documents. And he's a smart person, so he can't, he can't have done this by chance. He has knowingly been engaged in perpetrating one of the largest frauds ever attempted in history. operating this Clinton Foundation for purposes it's not authorized for, sucking up hundreds of millions and billions of dollars from governments around the world to go into the slush fund that was never the one that the Jerry's talking about now was operated out of Boston, actually. First Quincy, Massachusetts, but then Boston. He has never done any of this paperwork properly. And how do you explain that? How do you say, here's a Rhodes Scholar, one of the smartest people in America, goes off, has this distinguished career, earns tens of millions of dollars advising on complex assignments around the world, and he can't see that it's incredibly dangerous to, procure drugs from sketchy places, sketchy companies, and then fly this stuff around the world. But there's no evidence that the Clinton Foundation ever spent anywhere near the amount of money that is claimed that Ireland sent them for drugs themselves. No evidence of that.
And they got involved with this company in India called Ranbaxy, Ranbaxy, Ranbaxy. What was that company all about?
All right, so that's an interesting thing. So in the United States, our drug prices are very high. So there has been a business developed, and I think it operates around the world, selling what are called generic medicines, generic knockoff copies of branded drugs. That's in essence what this Ranbaxy was. And by the time they met the Clintons in 2002, Ranbaxy was being advised by Rajat Gupta, that former, he's a felon now. Then he was the chairman of this famous accounting consulting firm called McKinsey. Rajat had the assignment, his firm had the assignment for building Ranbaxy up. Rajat connected Bill Clinton to Ranbaxy. Rajat also hired Bill Clinton's daughter, Chelsea, to work for McKinsey and on these health-related topics. And there's a great work done by Marsha Blackburn's staff. She's a congressperson in Tennessee now running for Senate. They did a lot of work in 2016, published a report in September 2016 that lays this all out, called the India Success Story. You can see it online. And this Ranbaxy company, now in hindsight, we know, had a major league problem. They had this gigantic business exporting generic drugs, not HIV drugs, but generic drugs into the U.S. They needed political cover. So they first hooked up with the Clinton Foundation in October of 2003. There's an agreement mentioned in their annual report. Ranbaxy was a publicly traded company. And Bill and his team and Iris started pumping out and promoting the use of these Ranbaxy products. There's a great article. It's a very sobering article called "Dirty Medicine" in Fortune magazine, published in May of 2013, that recounts all of this in gory depth. And I'll be quick on it, Jerry and Graham. But by August of 2004, the World Health Organization and the government of South Africa became very concerned about the quality of Ranbaxy HIV/AIDS medicines that were being promoted by Bill Clinton and our magaziner. So an investigation ensued, and it turned out it took a long time, and the prosecution of Ranbaxy in this country was in part led by Rod Rosenstein. By May of 2013, Ranbaxy paid a $500 million fine for distributing adulterated HIV/AIDS and other medicines around the world, in part through the Clinton Foundation. And I would argue that fine is not enough. The promoters of Ranbaxy played it smart. The second these investigations started, they sold their stakes for many billions of dollars. Those promoters are currently being sued by the company that they sold Ranbaxy to in the middle of this investigation, and who knows what will happen to them in the end. When this Fortune magazine is really chilling, and if there are children in the room, they should maybe leave. That language, but this is the tough story I'm going to tell.
Yeah, go ahead, Charles. You're okay. Should be good. I have that article up in front here for the people to see.
Good. So what happened is, when this whistleblower determined to go public, to push the company to do the right thing, in 2004 and 2005, originally the top brass at Ranbaxy said, all right, we want to make this right, and they take it up to the CEO. Thinking they're going to get a green light to fix everything and do the right thing and do right by the people who are using these drugs. And the CEO, an Indian gentleman, looks at the group supposedly and says, what are you guys making a big fuss about this for? All we're doing is killing black people in Africa.
Wow.
Who cares?
Wow. Unbelievable.
That's the article. It's in that article. It's
And
never
this
been.
is and this of course also then involves the money that came from Ireland, because the money that was pumped into this, Ireland and France were two countries that were pumping a lot of the money into this, and the World Health Organization in Geneva was also involved in this scam. And Ranbaxy, what it fundamentally came to it, as you're pointing out, didn't care that the drugs were defective, because they're saying it's only blacks in Africa dying. Is that all correct, Charles?
It is. It is. And when you think through, in my younger days as a student, I actually traveled extensively and wrote a lengthy paper about the country of Kenya. But I traveled all over Africa. And, when you do that, when you spend time in Africa and you take off your politically correct glasses if you're still wearing them, you come to understand that in Africa, it's not a case of racism. There still is, profound ethnic rivalry, black on black ethnic rivalry. There's no such thing as, black solidarity in many places in Africa. And imagine this: you're sitting there, you're a corrupt leader of, let's just pick a country like Rwanda, where we know there were trouble, and we know there's deep ethnic rivalry there. And you hear that some amiable dunce, George W. Bush, is going to send around $15 billion to different countries to say they have an HIV/AIDS problem. You're going to put your hand up and say, yeah, I got an HIV/AIDS problem. I need some of that money. And then if you're really diabolical and you want to kill off members of an ethnic group that, has been opposed to you historically, you have no problem distributing adulterated drugs to that group because it kills your enemy. So it's a perfect thing. You get a lot of money coming into your country. You can divert that money personally. You can pretend you're doing good work fighting HIV/AIDS. You get international credit for that. And meanwhile, behind the scenes, you're killing off your rivals. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that I suspect did happen and is happening in Africa and around the world.
And talk about Haiti, because I think Haiti is another major part of the Irish scam. And
Absolutely, Dr. Corsi.
what happened in Haiti, Charles, that precipitated the Clintons and the Clinton Foundation involvement? What happened in Haiti? Talk about the earthquake and how it got the Clinton Foundation and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton involved, because we're going to lead now to the major role played in the Haiti saga by Dennis O'Brien.
Okay. Well, if I may, Jerry, let me set the stage by going a little bit further back into time. A gentleman that some people describe as, the next Albert Schweitzer, Dr. Paul Farmer, decided to start experimenting in Haiti before he actually was a doctor. And in theory began curing people, but began experimenting, with HIV/AIDS treatments. And I've got experts looking at his work who really question the soundness of his work. But based on his work, starting in 2001, April of 2001, the arguments to throw tons of money at fighting HIV/AIDS were advanced in part using the work of Dr. Paul Farmer and another person I think is a scoundrel, Jeffrey Sachs, who was then a professor at Harvard. They mounted this argument that the world needed to come up with tens of billions of dollars to help fight HIV/AIDS using these drugs. And they then began with the Clinton Foundation experimenting on the people of Haiti starting in around 2004. So there's a long track record, I think, of abuse, and the likelihood is that these Ranbaxy drugs went into Haiti starting around 2004 or thereabouts. By 2010, in January, actually, I need to go back a step. In April of 2009, Bill somehow was convinced to be a special UN envoy to Haiti, which gave him superpowers, above the law, basically, in Haiti, to start trying to help. And then after that happened, in January of 2010, I think January 12th or thereabouts, an earthquake hit, and it just devastated the country. Devastated it. It hit right in the capital city there, and you see pictures now. It's no better. It's worse off now than it was then. It's just a complete mess. And there's a country where, again, you have the problem of you don't have doctors, you don't have nurses, you don't have hospital beds, you don't have electricity where you need it. You don't have basic infrastructure that would allow the fight against HIV/AIDS and other issues to happen for you. You just don't have any of that. So they're various estimates of how much money was raised. People's, it was really poor people would give on their cell phone, maybe using Dennis O'Brien's technology, the Digicel technology, would send, in little bits and bobs, €5 here, €10 there, and then big governments. I don't know how much Irish government gave, but the U.S. government, the U.K. government, many governments gave. All told, some estimate as much as $13 billion may have been sent towards Haiti. Now, to put that amount of money in perspective, the entire population of Haiti in a recent year that I checked only consumes $10 billion in total,
Wow.
the whole country. So if you send $13 billion towards a country where each year all the population spends $10 billion, you ought to get more than a T-shirt for that. I mean, you should be able to put, hospitals up and redo roads and maybe, electrical systems and this and that. No evidence. There's been no accounting for where this money went. And worse, in the Clinton Foundation books, it's a travesty. Bill talks in his forums that the Clinton Foundation first set up a Clinton Foundation Haiti fund. There's no evidence of that. Then with the Bushes, they created the Clinton Bush Haiti Fund, and they claim in a filing for 2010 that they routed $37.2 million, which is a gigantic amount of money in the Clinton Foundation books, down to Haiti. But they say they sent it to a post office box address in Baltimore, Maryland, where there is no such Clinton Bush Haiti Fund. It's never registered in Maryland. There is no such entity. So on the surface of it, that screams out as a massive fraud in the Clinton Foundation books, $37.2 million. Bill and the former leader of Haiti were then appointed co-chairman of something called the Interim Haiti Relief Commission that was supposed to administer the $13 billion or whatever the money was, and they refused to account for that money. And they're able to get away with it because the UN is a sieve of corruption, in my view. I mean, that is just a travesty that the people of Haiti, these downtrodden people of Haiti, may have had as much as $13 billion sent towards it, and then thieves have basically stolen money that was intended to help these poor people. And still those poor people are there without electricity, without food, without medicine, without education, without infrastructure. And this is after we, in theory, have sent them $13 billion. That's disgusting.